Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody for attending today. We're going to be talking about how you can evolve to an Intel-led security organization. My name is Joseph O'Loughlin. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Threat Intelligence. I'm going to be joined shortly by my colleague Jason from FireEye, and as well as our kind customer Nigel from MGM Resorts International. We're here to talk about the differences that Intel can make in your organization. Now, we know no one has enough people. No one has people with enough of the skill sets that we need to address the threats that we're facing today. Nobody has the visibility into all of the different things we need to be aware of in order to face the threats that we're facing. Couple that with the fact that security dollars are really tight, especially for small organizations, and the fact that the playing field just gets more and more complex. All of these things lead to some pretty tough challenges for organizations, and that's what we think that intelligence-led security organizations can address. So I'm going to spend the next couple minutes talking, couple slides, talking about really what it is we mean by threat intelligence. You know what, before I do that, let me ask a couple of questions. How many people would say that they have an Intel-led security organization? Okay, different kind of question. How many people consider threat feeds threat intelligence? How many people consider reputation feeds, bad IP addresses, URLs, DNS lookups? Also threat intelligence? Okay, that's fine. This is all good. They're important parts of the security play, and we need those parts. But today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a different kind of threat intelligence, a deeper threat intelligence that we really think can make the difference in your security organizations. So as I said, I'm going to spend a couple minutes up here talking to the slide what we consider threat intelligence, trying to give you a feel for what that can do for you and the value that it brings. But we know that not every security organization is ready to be an Intel-led security organization today. So that's why Jason's going to come up and he's going to talk about some best practices that security organizations can utilize to get the full value that they can get from threat intelligence. Things like understanding the threats for your particular organization. What exactly are you up against? Or defining the shareholders. Who needs the intelligence in your organization? How are they going to use it? What are they going to use it for? All of those things, those foundation building blocks, again, to get the most you can get out of security intelligence. And then Nigel, again from MGM Resorts International, is going to come up and probably say, I never heard the term Intel-led before you started talking to me about it, but here's some real life experiences that we've faced, things that we've done with threat intelligence that I think align with the things that you're saying with Intel-led. So let's talk about, we talked about threat feeds and all those others being threat intelligence capabilities. Let's define a different way of talking about threat intelligence. And of course, the best way to do that is let's talk about the weather. That makes a lot of sense, right? Well, a lot of times in cybersecurity, we talk about earthquakes and we talk about hurricanes as an analogy for what threat intelligence is and can do for you. So, earthquake, that's a sudden, disrupting event. Really nothing you can do for it. A lot of times it's how you react to it that's going to determine what kind of damage it does for you. But a lot of times beyond your control. Hurricanes, on the other hand, we generally have some knowledge that they're coming and what's going to happen with them. We're able to get a couple of days, couple of weeks to understand what it is that is at risk and make some decisions based on mitigating that risk. So The considerations in this particular case, the questions, these are the questions that I have to ask. I have to have answers to them so that I can act appropriately and I can act in the best interest of protecting our assets. So, where's this hurricane going to go? How bad is it going to be when it gets here? How much rain am I going to expect? All of those things are important things. Those are questions of risk. Trying to understand the risk that you're facing. So, how does the meteorologist, I'll try and make that better next time I say it, how do they address this? Well, they have sensors all over the world. They take in data feeds, real-time weather, and they map that with analytical models that they've used on historic weather patterns. So they've been studying what's happened, how when you have these threats in the past, how they operate, what you see. They mix that with the current information that they're getting from the sensors, weather sensors all over, and then they start to make intelligent assessments. Oh, you know what? This hurricane, it's going to hit along the East Coast. It's going to be a Category 3. Based on how fast it's moving, we know that it'll probably dump this much rain. So now we start making some decisions ourselves based on that information. So what are the decisions that I'm going to make? Well, it really depends on my assets. If that hurricane's going to hit Florida, and I live in Florida, okay, maybe I want to board things up. I want to take the most valuable stuff I've got with me, and I want to evacuate. If I live in Ohio, and I have property in Florida, I'm going to take different steps. I might be looking for the proxy. I might have somebody who controls my property and contact them and give them the information that they need or make sure that they're prepared to address what's going on. So this is really very similar to what threat intelligence does. Threat intelligence looks at historical activity so that we can recognize it when it happens. We match that with machine telemetry from our network and endpoint sensors all over the world. We add into that the human intelligence, our researchers that are living in the dark web, that are living with the people who are behind these attacks. And we pull all of that together, and then we provide that intelligence to our customers to allow them to make informed decisions. So let's talk a little bit about what's the value of being Intel-led? What's the value of threat intelligence in your organization? What are the common challenges that we're up against? And what are the desired states that we can get to with threat intelligence? So a couple here that I've listed. First is from a strategic standpoint. So sometimes a business might be making an acquisition, might be deciding to go into a new line of business, might be expanding geographically out to an area. So they're going to want intelligence on geopolitical concerns, geographic concerns. Who are the actors? What kinds of threats are we facing when we start talking about this line of business? To allow them to make an informed decision. Do we stop or do we go? If we go, do we have the right assets in place, the right defenses in place to address things? So if I'm seeing new attacks on denials of service, you can make strategic decisions on the technology that you're going to purchase and put it in place. So it's really taking the decision making from a security dollar standpoint, making the best use of my resources. Another area challenge that's faced is our threat hunters. We talk about the dwell time. Industry average is between 100 and 200 days. Sandra Joyce earlier said today APT 35 was what, 155 days? I don't, about that. 155 days before they're discovered. Which means that our security operations really they're going after a whole bunch of things. But if they have information on the tactics and procedures that their most likely attackers use, they'll be able to better hone in on that. And they'll be more effective in threat hunting. Again, a lot of people are saying, it's not a question of if anymore, it's a question of when. And the quicker that you can respond, the better off you're going to be. And the more you know, the easier it's going to be for you to respond. So another piece are analysts overwhelmed with security alerts. Which ones do I focus on? Now again, think about this from the small security organizations all the way up. Most security organizations are dealing with 60 to 80 different security vendors. With all of those different appliances, what are the alerts that I should be paying attention to? How am I more efficient in addressing these alerts? Operational intelligence can give you that, and it can also give you context around those alerts. Not only are you seeing this alert, this is what it means. This is the threat actor behind it. This is generally what they do, so you can, again, better position your assets. And then finally, operators don't know which patches to prioritize. One of the things that we always say, patch, patch, patch. It's not possible. Some of our technology takes a month and a half to set up a change control for that patch. So you can't just do all of the patches, but understanding which vulnerabilities are being exploited against organizations like yours or industries like yours or in your geographic area can give you the information necessary to prioritize those patches. So just some examples for what threat intel can do for you. And so now I'm going to bring up Jason to talk about some best practices in moving organizations along the threat intelligence path.
Thank you, Joe. If I were to ask each of you the following questions, how might you answer them today? What are your top threat concerns, and how are you set up currently to protect the organization from those threats? What other parts of the business outside your security group is informed and aware of those threat concerns? And how are your security teams currently prioritizing the events and the alerts that they're handling on a daily basis? These are the kind of questions that organizations who wish to have a fully capable or evolve into an Intel-led security program needs to routinely ask themselves. And over the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'll cover some key principles that will enable you and your organization to address and handle these questions so that you have an understanding of which actors have or will target you and why. Who across the organization needs to be kept informed, and how is that communication going to occur? And knowing what information is going to be critical to your security teams to make the decisions on which events to handle first. Prior to FireEye, I spent some time in the U.S. government and Department of Defense space, and it was through that experience where I developed some best practices around integrating threat intelligence across various security functions. And it was through that practice, going beyond just the technical integrations of indicators into your controls, but realizing the true application of real threat intelligence context and enrichment of data into those streams, as well as consuming the strategic elements and ingesting those strategic pieces into your security workflows. Now, the next 15 or 20 minutes isn't enough time to cover all the tactical details that's going to help or enable you to accomplish these things. But what I'll present to you are some of those key strategic elements that's going to guide you to lead or have an effective Intel-led security program. Now, I want to start by illustrating a simple step-up maturation model. And as I walk up this chain, I want you to think about your current organization and where you feel you might currently reside or sit. Organizations, they want to get the basics down. So you look at those bottom two rungs, applying or leveraging the limited resources you currently have and trying to get some basic security essentials in place, maybe some concepts. This is also where the technology comes into play, starting to deploy and plug in your various controls that's going to capture some of the threat visibility that you're going to need later as you get more Intel-led. Now from there, you get into your initial steps of becoming intel-led. This is where organizations start to take the technology that they've deployed and start some basic integrations. This is also the part where maybe they might start to subscribe to some intelligence. The initial phase also might be where organizations hire a threat intel expert or lead, or maybe they assign a current security member to take on that role. So now your team of one is an official threat intelligence function of your security program. Unfortunately, this is also the place where a lot of organizations stall their threat intelligence program. It's difficult to make that leap above that dotted line to a much more proactive and optimized state. It takes a lot of resources, it takes certain skill sets, or developing your existing personnel in certain skill sets. But it is so important to make that leap into a more proactive and optimized state, because now your threat intelligence won't only be telling you about the alerts that are occurring or what might be suspicious, but it's going to start informing across the organization about what those alerts and detections mean. Who are the threat actors behind it? What's the potential impact to my business should this threat actor be successful? And then how can we better prepare for future attempts by those same threat actors? That's what truly being optimized and proactive in an intel-led security program means. Now what I'm going to show next is a very effective first step towards that optimized state. And it's about starting by establishing a cyber threat profile, knowing the relevant threats to your organization. A common mistake organizations make is they become too narrowly focused on a certain threat actor or motivation. I'm only going to focus on espionage or APT. Everything else is a distant second. But how do you know what's relevant if you don't actually look inside your environment, scour the events, identify what the motivation might be behind those events, or what actors they may be attributed to? The adversaries are becoming a lot more sophisticated across cyber criminals as well as espionage actors. So truly being able to differentiate a cybercrime activity from an espionage will help build a more effective and accurate threat picture for your organization. So you can understand relative from an espionage group to the cybercrime, what's their capability? What's their target focus towards my organization? Are we seeing any direct targeting of us or the sector? So again, combining what you're learning from your industry peers or some of the industry profile reporting, combined with what you're actually seeing and observing within your own environment. It's a very effective measure that you can take to quickly understand and learn about the threat picture within your organization and know what's relevant to you. Now from this step, you even want to take it one level further and start to dig into the specific threat categories across each of the motivations. You want to start mapping the various threats that you're seeing in your environment to where they're being picked up along the kill chain. And I've illustrated here in that graphic a very simplistic view of a threat lifecycle or kill chain. From delivery, so where your spear phishing or phishing emails and web drive-by attacks are occurring, all the way through to command and control where there might be a suspected breach, compromise, or infection. And some of the outcomes by doing this exercise and being able to align what's actually occurring in your environment to where they fit along the threat lifecycle is going to help you understand a little bit about your own environment, some technology gaps. Are there certain controls that we have a gap in that we're missing? Are all the threats that we're seeing too far to the right of this life cycle? And we need to figure out why we can't be capturing more stuff further to the left. As you go through this exercise, what does it say about your threat intelligence feed? In the previous slide, I showed the threat profile where you map out espionage relative to crime. Which one is more relevant to me? But as you're identifying the threats correlated to your intelligence, are all the threats heavy onto one motivation? Am I only seeing cybercrime activity in my threat intelligence sources, but I know espionage is a much bigger concern? So that might be a gap I need to fill. So again, being able to go through this exercise, identify any resources that are needed to fill some of these gaps? Any other improvements across some of your processes? If we're seeing too many threats that are picked up too far to the right, what does it say about our process? We're not responding to some of the events earlier in the life cycle, or we're not effectively remediating where necessary. So once you've been able to establish this threat profile and gone through the exercise of mapping some of the specific threats you're seeing in your environment to where they fit along the life cycle and answer some of those key gap questions or do a gap analysis, you started now to build the foundation around a cyber threat intelligence program. And these listed here are some of those key elements around building that foundation. I talked about the cyber threat profile. That's one element of a larger operational threat profile where you look inside your business. What are our critical assets? How are we currently protecting those assets? What's the visibility my security teams have in those protective measures? Do we have all the tools necessary? Fully understanding your environment combined with the threat landscape is going to give you a much stronger and more enriched operational threat picture of your organization. Stakeholder analysis. Knowing who, not just inside the security program, but other parts of the business have a vested interest in some of the threat concerns. I'm an organization, I know my payment processing systems are targeted. Who are the owners of those systems? Who are the ones responsible for keeping the integrity of those systems up? They would be considered a stakeholder of a particular threat. How would I socialize and communicate threat intelligence to those stakeholders outside of the security group? In what format, what frequency am I going to communicate that information to? These are the types of things you have to work through to truly make your program much more effective. And then continuously receive feedback as you're socializing information to your stakeholders. Is the weekly emails I'm sending to this particular business unit effective? Is it being consumed? What more information do they want? What less information do they need? The last thing you want to do is build out a great process of communicating information to a stakeholder only to realize it's not being read or consumed. Why is that? Find out, make it more effective, especially as certain stakeholders turn over in the organization or move across to other parts of the business unit. And then lastly, intelligence requirements. How do you know what's a priority? Having to go through a process to draft, codify, continuously adjust your intelligence requirements. We talked about the cyber threat profile. Using that as kind of as a guide to help understand what's going to be a priority. Making sure your intelligence requirements are specific and not too vague in nature, so that when your security teams are responding to a certain event or alert, they know which intelligence requirement it maps to, and it's going to help them manage the prioritization of those events and alerts that I spoke to earlier. And as I mentioned, being able to continuously modify or adjust the intelligence requirements. A lot of the organizations who have developed a good, sustained process for this generally modify them a couple times a year, even the more mature ones on a quarterly basis. Now, these are the foundations for moving towards that proactive, optimized state of an intel-led program. But there are other ways to operationalize your threat intelligence as well. This here shows kind of a progression of an organization where they have now started to aggregate some of their security event data, typically through a SIEM or some other log aggregation tool. They're extracting out key observables of that security event data, and they're tying it to threat intelligence. Maybe it's as simple as a feed. Maybe it's more with context to specific cyber threat intelligence data. But then they got to be able to take that correlation and apply some validation analysis to it so they can understand not just what happened, but what might be some of the judged attribution behind the event. And if I've been able to identify some of the judged attribution, What does that say about the potential motivation of the activity? Who are the affected assets or personnel of the security event that I'm responding to? Does that speak to anything about motivation? We see a lot of organizations that when they respond to events, it's respond, re-image, and then move on. But they're not taking the time to do the actual validation analysis to fully understand what event occurred and what can we learn from it. If we know the affected personnel or assets of the event, again, what does it say about the motivation? But how can we better further protect those individuals or put in additional countermeasures to detect future attempts of threat actors that might be targeting those same personnel or assets? Once we've judged some attribution, what do we know about the tools used by those actors? And do we have the controls and the detections in place to mitigate those types of threats? And then, of course, what's the potential impact from those threat actors if they were to become successful in my environment? By doing that extra validation analysis, it's going to make the reporting that you pass on internally as well as across the organization much more meaningful and impactful, because now it's enriched with a lot more threat intelligence context and judgments made about the event versus just what happened and when. Now you're starting to answer some of the questions of why and what next. So I want to sum up here kind of a mature framework of an Intel-led threat intelligence program. Talked about those three areas on the left and building those foundations. Those are critical. There's a lot more you can do once you get past those initial foundational elements. But without understanding what information is being passed to you, who else do you need to report the information to, and how are you going to prioritize that information, and is your information aimed at the right threats? Without being able to do that, you're not going to fully benefit the organization with an Intel-led program. Knowing the right information, knowing it's aimed at the right threats, and knowing that it's going to the right people, that's going to benefit your organization much more fully with an Intel-led security program. Now, I want to bring up our next guest, Nigel Gardner from MGM Resorts, and he's going to show and talk to about how he applies some of this threat intelligence out in the real world. He's a threat intelligence lead for MGM, so he has the arduous task of defending against some of the more sophisticated cybercrime actors targeting their organization as well as the industry. And so I'm going to introduce Nigel. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nigel. I'm the Threat Intelligence Lead for MGM Resorts International. And I know when everyone thinks of, they see the word MGM, I know you think of casino, right? But we're a lot more than that, right? We're an international company. We have 27 properties around the world, and not including like a Bellagio, an Aria, a Mirage, right? We have MGM in National Harbor here. We just opened up a property in Springfield. We have properties in China. We have Macau. We have Cotai. We're looking at ventures in Japan. So what does that mean, right? That means when you walk into one of our resorts, right, we have boxing events. We have conferences. Like we host Black Hat every year. We have retail. We have restaurants. So painting that threat profile is very tough. And working with Jason within this last year, and I know he's worked with MGM previously, really helped build and sell our program. There is a slide there of the discovery all the way down to the command and control. And that slide in and of itself, our CISO presented to the board and sold our program, how you're able to mitigate a threat, how you're able to take it from the right and move it to the left. That in and of itself is priceless, because executives and your directors, or whoever your management team will understand that, to say that here's a threat and here's what we're going to do to mitigate it. And it's not it doesn't happen over 6 months, it doesn't happen over a year, but it's It's that strategic decision, understanding who your threat is and what can you do to mitigate that, and taking incremental steps to mitigate that, right? Whether it be you're working with your architectural engineer, working with just awareness to your various groups, your HR groups, right? We have when you check into the hotel, right? Those are prime targets for social engineering, because we're here to help. We're in hospitality, right? We're here to help you. We're not here to hinder you when you come visit one of our properties. But it also presents very various issues that we have to bring them aware of and provide that layer of protection. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And so what does threat intelligence means to us? Understanding the different types that are in our environment. As I just described, we're in retail, we're in hospitality, we're also in a little bit of finance, because some of the properties have their own CFO, right? When you come to one of the casinos, we can issue out a marker, right? So there's a lot of money transactions, but then there's also a lot of, it's also a prime suspect for money laundering, right? So we have to worry about that. For retail, it's always going to be point of sale. For hospitality, it deals with cybercrime and our e-commerce platforms, right? We're looking to interface with our customers and build revenue, but we also have to protect that. Even for hacktivism, right? Before I even go there, how many of you know we have a dolphin habitat? We have a dolphin habitat. So every year there is a group that targets us, and they will protest. We just had a baby calf born at the Mirage. So if you come to Las Vegas, right, come visit the calf. I know on the 20th there is a staged protest, right? And unfortunately, we had the October 1 incident, and we got some bad press regarding the legal decisions made, right? So that also makes us a target for certain activities that's going to span across the spectrum here. But at least understanding that threat, and then planning for it can help mitigate it, right? And inform the right personnel on here's how to take action. Stakeholder analysis can't emphasize that enough. Working with our corporate security and understanding that, hey, we're seeing this type of activity on social networking, and working with them to say, okay, we're monitoring social media. Somebody wants to throw bath bombs in the Bellagio fountain, right, during this event. Hey, let's go talk with corporate security, see if they're aware of that, right? And then it kind of creates that synergy, and you're sharing that information. And I touched on how executives know the value that it provides. So my background, I come from a military background, so I was an Intel guy as well, but I also spent some time on the ground. So I also know Intel drives operations, because you need to make smart decisions. When you go into an environment and you don't know, it's very unstable, right? And it can be unnerving, right? But if you're armed with the knowledge of what this threat actor does, their TTPs, you find yourself on very stable ground in a fluid environment. And adjusting the defenses as needed, right? Working with the architecture and security team, saying, okay, here's the latest TTPs. What are we doing about it, and how can we make adjustments? So the threat diagnostic, as mentioned before, working with Jason, we do a threat diagnostic every year, and we've done it for the last couple of years, and the return has been very valuable. It lets us gauge where we're at. It lets the management team gauge where we're at, and all the way up to the program itself. Are we making changes, and what direction are we headed? And the best part is it's based on our specific environment. So we send out our web gateway logs, we send our email logs, the firewall, right? A lot of these logs we send it to FireEye for analysis, right? Because we understand that we're doing what we need to do, but it's also good to have that third-party assessment, right? Saying, okay, what did we miss, right? Because are we threat intel led? We understand that we want to be threat intel led, right? It's tough to come up here and say we're doing it perfectly, because I say we're not. There's a lot of challenges. When I talked to my peers earlier today, technology only takes you so far. It's to the point where you sit down and actually do the analysis and talk to the team, talk to your different stakeholders, understanding what their issues are, and then saying, hey, here are the threats, and here's how we can do it. Here's how we can make it better. I think one of the biggest things we were able to do strategically was why two-factor is important. I think I saw about 2 hours ago the importance of two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication. Right? If you talk to certain businesses, it is a hindrance, right, to their operation. Right? Coming from hospitality, we have lifeguards. Right? We have certain staff that may not have the ability to do two-factor authentication. So you have to think of that on that business level. Does your staff have the ability to access this? And if not, how can they access information if they're off-prem, right? Some things you have to think about that probably didn't come across my mind. But then it's working together with them and saying, okay, well, if it's not here, well, can we do it at another level? Maybe it's management employees or above. Or based off of the logs that we're seeing, the profile that we've built, we're saying this group, our guest services are being highly targeted. We should step up that authentication level and make little incremental changes like that, and then you monitor it. You go in and say, okay, they are being hit with this campaign, or they're seeing this specific email campaign, because we all know phishing is probably the best way they're going to enter your environment, and see if there's any changes with that. And threat hunting. I know with the threat diagnostic, they'll come back and say, well, hey, here's an indicator. Can you guys verify this? It could be a false positive, or it could be an incident. So it gives us that evaluation period, which is, as you know, it's super important. It's check but verify. Identifying various campaigns. It's a lot easier to, when it comes to campaigns, especially when you're talking to non-technical folks, if you can summarize a 365 phishing campaign, right? Understanding what that means. It means that somebody just created a fake login to steal your Windows login or your 365 credentials, and how many times that's happening. People outside of information security don't really understand that, but they can speak to that, saying, "Oh, somebody wants my password. I didn't know that." Believe it or not, it's true. And you can provide the information to say, yes, this happens, and you can quantify it. And how threat actors are circumventing common defenses. So if we're seeing a lot of false positives, or with a threat diagnostic, we're seeing that something coming through, it could always work with the engineering and architecture team to say, okay, this is coming through, or here's the latest, here's a change in TTPs. Like I know in the last year, we were seeing a change from Word documents, or maybe to maybe PDFs, or now they're emphasizing URLs, right? So what do I do with my email gateway, right? Do we throttle it back, or do we make other changes within the firewall, or are we going to feed more information to our web gateway? So if somebody does click on a link, how do we block them from going out to it, right? But this is that understanding the stakeholder analysis and your threat landscape, and the changes that you can do as a threat intelligence person to say, here's the evidence that I'm seeing, and here's the trend. Where do you want to go with this, right? Here are some of the options. And it said provide recommendations to remediate. So how do some of the things that we were able to do is to operationalize threat feeds. I think are important, right? It enriches your cases. So how we have it set up, I'm going to remain tool agnostic. So just because I know across the board everybody uses different tools, and different tool sets are going to get you different results. But ideally, there's a couple of ways we thought about doing with either taking the FireEye threat feed, feeding it directly into your SIEM. Building some correlations that way, putting into the case, initiating an incident, right? This would be the threat hunting phase of events that we don't know have happened, but we're bouncing off the FireEye feed and letting the incident response team take a look at that. Another way would be just responding to an incident that meets certain correlations. But with that, as the case comes all the way back to your level 1 analyst, the data is already enriched, so they know what they're dealing with, right? you can come up with a certain hash or a tag that can deal with a certain threat actor, or that way you automatically can escalate it quickly. So level 1 analyst is going to be able to handle this. It's going to go up to a level 3, level 4. And then I'm monitoring. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, I've seen this before. Let me pull out some information and give it to our analysts. Say, okay, I've seen these TTP before. We should look out for these changes in the endpoint, right? So that really is, and I have a really good use case for that where I'll talk about later about the analyst access request. The FireEye reporting is really good. It's very technical, but I also know that when I have a weekly report that I put out, and it goes up to our CISO, and he actually briefs it to our CEO. And a lot of the times I do look at what FireEye is putting out, but we all deal with data consumption, and one of the things that helps us out would be the FireEye analyst. So we have an L3 analyst there. And I really incorporate Jessica Blum. She's our analyst. I really incorporate it into our environment. We have at least we talk every 2 weeks, but we email constantly. And if she doesn't hear from me, she just knows that I'm busy. But she'll always like push information, and it's really helpful because it'll help summarize the reports that are on there, and will make it relevant to our environment. Because as you know, it's a bottleneck of information, and it's hard to prioritize what's important and what's not important. The more I involve her, the more she just is automatically, or she takes the initiative to feed information. And that's been valuable for when we want to conduct an analyst access request. I need more information on this event. So there's a phishing case that came out, and I immediately looked at it, and it was specifically targeted, and I said, okay, there's something wrong about this. All right, and I took the information, took the headers, emailed it to, sent it over to FireEye, included our L3 analyst. I'm like, I need more information on this, and I need this very quickly. And it was a quick turnaround, and I got some information back, and because we have other partners, and I think, and I implore everyone here to change business cards, because the valuable information you share is also not with your threat intelligence group, but then your peers. And then also like different groups that we're involved in. So I was able to pick up the phone and say, okay, I'm seeing this, and I know like when it comes to off the report that I got, this group can go after like PII information, can go after W-2s, can go after payroll, right? So when you talk to different people, you're like, hey, what have you seen before? I've seen this, and you've seen this, and you're able to just talk about a couple of things like, okay, well here's the target. What can we do to monitor this? And then it actually happened. But before that happened, I was able to notify people. So when it happened, we were able to take action immediately, right? But that's just through collaboration. I always felt like for information and threat intelligence, you don't silo it. You spread it out as much as you can, and you talk to people about it and say, here's the value of this. I was able to talk to corporate security or even our fraud and our investigations team, our HR team, and explain the importance of, okay, here's what's going to happen. And they don't really believe it's going to happen until it happens, right? You're like, wow, I didn't think that was going to happen. You're like, well, let's say I told you so, but it's like, here, I'm here to support you. I'm not here to slap your hand. I'm like, all right, I got your back. Because threat intelligence, even though we want to be threat intel led, we're here to support you. We're here to support the business, right? And I think that's pretty much it. I know I kind of touched on a couple of areas, but I'm a firm believer in the services that I receive from FireEye. So I appreciate them giving me the opportunity to come up here. They've really helped us a lot, and then help take our program to the next level and provide that support. And I feel like every time I come here, I'm able to pick somebody's brain, and then also talk to my peers and say, hey, what are you guys doing, and how do I make myself better? I like to believe we will be threat intel led, but I know that we have room for improvement. But we're taking the right steps, and our management team and our executives have our support, and they believe in what we're doing. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to talk to you afterwards. But thanks for your time.